Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I would like to begin by acknowledging that UBC's Vancouver campus is situated on the traditional territory of the Musqueam peoples and recognize that you're joining us today from many lands whose ancestral caretakers deserve our respect and admiration. And it is also my pleasure to introduce you to a group of brave students who have not only jumped into the unknown, first time ever, international educational adventures in Ecuador and Chile, but have also voluntarily stepped forward to share their amazing experiences in this somewhat intimidating and high-profile forum. Here are Ren Ellis, Jaya Lumsden, Ethan Veyman, Vanessa Leibel, and Faith Wong. They will briefly introduce themselves during the talks, but I personally want to thank them for making history in the Teaching and Learning Seminar Series. They are the first group of undergraduate students presenting in this event, and they have fulfilled the dream of having them here. And they're making the name worthwhile. It's called the Teaching and Learning Seminar Series. So I envisioned that we would have student speakers in this event, and it's a delight to see them. They will share their experiences. This is just a fantastic group of bright young professionals sharing firsthand about their pathways in university, which I think is something that we must value a lot. Thanks also to the colleagues who make this event possible with the support of the Dean's Office, from the design of the promotional material to the coordination of registration, the complicated technological setup that you see here, chair moving. It just takes a village to produce these talks. So I want to thank all of those wonderful people. And so I also want to thank the Global Skills Opportunity Funding, who have contributed to the finances of the students going abroad. Also to the Go Global program, our very own program at UBC. They also provide financial support and administrative capacity for the coordination of these field schools. That is just magic what they do. And the Global Skills Opportunity is a federal grant, so that's really fantastic. These remarkable educational experiences would not be possible without the contribution of our wonderful partners in Ecuador and Chile. Apologies for only showing these beautiful logos instead of mentioning them one by one and listing our individual hosts' names, but that would take the entire hour for us to express our gratitude for these wonderful people. Without them, definitely these field schools would not be possible. And finally, my appreciation to the audience here. Your absence would also make this absolutely meaningless. So thank you so much. Let's just give everyone a round of applause. And I actually will present the first slide in the role of coordinator of the TLSS, but also, as you may know, I'm Ecuadorian and I run the Chile Field School. So I have a little bit about everything here. These are the titles of the courses for anyone interested. And what the speakers will talk about today, they will highlight important learning experiences. They will talk about contributions to their careers. They will share their their experiences, and they will also share some significant moments and anecdotes during the field school. So without any further ado, Ren is first. Microphone.
Hi, can you all hear me? You're okay. So my name is Ren Ellis. I'm a fourth year natural resources conservation student, and I attended the Ecuador Field School, and this is my second to last year. So let's get right into it. So I've titled this section of the presentation 4 Ecosystems, One Great Adventure. So I'm kind of just going to be going through all my highlighted moments from each of the 4 different ecosystems that we got to visit when we were in Ecuador. So the first stop on this adventure, we visited the Amazon rainforest, and we partnered with the Tiputini Biodiversity Station. And this is also where we gained majority of our technical skills for the trip. We got to learn how to do proper tree and understory plant measurement. We got to learn how to use a laser rangefinder to measure volume of the canopy, as well as tree height. We also got to set up field plots. This is the first time I set up large-scale field plots such as these. And we also had statistical applications of this, which was really great to actually get to use my stats knowledge in a real report style of work. Yeah. In terms of the more significant moments, they're not less technical. As you can see, I titled this slide "Into the Dark and Up in the Sky." So my two significant moments from this trip in particular, the first one was up in the sky, where we got to go bird watching from the top of a 40-meter kapok tree. We climbed all the way up to the top, up to a small little platform, and we listened to our guide and our professors who knew knowledge about bird watching, learned all about the different birds that were flying around. This was also the first time in about 5 or 6 days where we saw light of day. Because prior to this, we were doing our field plot measurements and we were in understory, and it's quite dark the whole time. So we were finally out in the light, in the sun, and I got to take a moment just to sit on top of that tree and just take a breath and realize I'm in the Amazon rainforest in the middle of Ecuador, and this is really, really cool. And then the second part of this, the Into the Dark, on the second to last night, I believe, we had our second night hike that I was able to go on. And on this night hike, we had a trained guide from the biodiversity station take us around through the different parts of the forest. And we got to see some of the biodiversity, such as a small little salamander that one of the guides is holding. We got to see all the different biodiversity in the flora and fauna that we wouldn't see typically throughout the day. And a really impactful moment for me was when we got to gather in one section of the trail and we all stood in silence and turned off our headlamps, and we just listened to all the sounds of the forest, all the howler monkeys, all the insects, all the birds that might be chirping, anything. And it was pretty surreal for me, considering majority of the time when I'm in BC or I'm in Canada, there's light pollution almost everywhere, and there's no time where you're outside and it's fully dark. But this was the one opportunity where you could hold your hand a foot from your face and you would not be able to see it at all. You could see just about nothing. So it was pretty cool to get to experience that. So the second stop on this trip is we got to partner with Equilibrio Azul on the coast of Ecuador, and we got to do just about everything with turtles. So the first part of this day, we visited a turtle nest and we rescued 5 baby sea turtles. And we also learned about some of the different aspects that make a sea turtle nest successful and some of the different considerations when looking to conserve sea turtle nesting areas. And then you can see on our top left up there, we also got to learn how to properly measure and clean the sea turtles. I think the most significant moment when people ask me, what was your favorite part of this trip? I get to say, I got to clean a turtle. It's pretty fun. And then the next little slide I have just kind of shows a little video of me playing with one of the turtles at the rehab center. So this type of physiotherapy, kind of like playing a game, is really important for them, for all the turtles that are going to be released. It helps to strengthen their spines and rehabilitate so they can be released back into the ocean. So the third of 4 stops, we got to visit Yanguia community in the cloud forest. And this is where we really got our community hands-on experience. We got to learn about all the different aspects that Yanguia, and I'll say this beforehand, Yanguia used to be a logging community back in the late 80s. However, since then they've transitioned into be focusing on ecotourism, food forest planting, as well as jams and cheese making, and other different aspects that help to promote local economy. So we got the chance to help with planting some of the trees. We were planting avocado trees. We would hold them down 2 or 3 at a time, or 7, depending. And we would hold them down a large hill and then walk back up, grab more. And I think in total, we hauled down about 250 trees down to a platform. And then afterwards, we got to plant them. You can see me here in the middle with my little avocado tree that I'm about to plant on the field. This part here. And then on the last night that we were visiting Yanguia, we had a community bonfire. This is where we got to sing and dance and play with all the kids. And there was also a presentation of bracelets from the people that we were having homestays with. So it was a really good moment to connect with the community and connect with the people that we were staying with and show them some appreciation and really get to understand the community vibe there a bit better. And then the final of 4 stops, we got to visit Cotopaxi. This was the highest point on the trip in terms of elevation. You can see, even though it's kind of clouded over on the far end right there, there's me in front of the volcano, and this one here on the side, that was me trying to take a photo of the volcano with the clouds in front of it earlier that day. We also were able to work with Aglomerados Cotopaxi, which is a forestry plantation. And they had some really interesting aspects to how they are running forestry there that I really thought could be brought back here to BC. In terms of, they really had clear focus on conservation. 30% of the land for this plantation was set aside for conservation of both wildlife and hydrological conservation. And then they also balanced community involvement. They had land set aside for grazing that helps discourage illegal logging. And they also still stimulated the local economy. But yeah, those are our 4 stops. And then I'm going to pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Jaya. I'm a 4th-year student in Forest Bioeconomy, Sciences, and Technology, and I went on the Chile Field School. And I'd like to share with you some of my experiences. First off, a little bit about the Chile Field School. So we went all around the country. The 4 major cities we went to were, we started off in Santiago, and then we went down to Pucón, from Pucón to Valdivia, and then back up to Concepcion. So this course was centered around 4 major modules, and throughout the course, we would visit multiple different sites such as native forests, forest plantations, national parks, universities, to learn about how all of these contribute to Chile's global forest economy. Okay, so this field school made a really big impact and contributions to my degree personally. So forest bioeconomy, it's a relatively new degree program. And so one thing that I really struggle with about being in this degree is, what am I going to do after I graduate? What career opportunities are there for me? And so this field school really helped me be able to visualize what I could do, because a lot of it was spent talking to different professionals in forestry companies, field site managers, nursery managers, people working in offices, trying to get the supply chains going. And so being able to speak to them really opened up my mind to what I could do once I graduated. It really helped me be able to visualize concepts learned in the classroom and see how they were applied to real life situations. I learned a lot about different land use management issues in class, about biomaterials such as nanocellulose, cellulose, and in my mind, like, I never really thought about where they came from. And this trip, like seeing forest plantations and how they're managed for these specific products, was really eye-opening. Okay, important learning experiences throughout this trip. Well, this trip was really fun. I met so many friends. I had so many good times. At the end of the day, it was a course. So 3 really big things I learned. I think the biggest thing I learned, and the most shocking thing, was the silviculture differences in Chile versus Canada. How in Chile, a lot of the forestry is done on private land versus in Canada, it's done on public land. And so seeing just how different they manage their plantations and their forests for different products was really, really interesting. One thing that I was not aware of going into this trip, or wasn't very educated on, were forest plantations and the benefits and uses of them. And so this trip, we visited a lot of plantations, spoke to a lot of different people about the management, and their benefits for commercial use. And then lastly, the biodiversity loss, conflict between parties of interest. We spoke to both large forestry companies as well as smaller forestry companies, a lot of indigenous communities, and getting to see that those broad opinions on like best interest in land use was very, very eye-opening. Okay, so significant moments during the trip. This slide was kind of hard to think of because there were so many great moments during the trip. But I think the first one was being able to make connections between sustainable systems and sustainable forest products. Once again, I got the opportunity to talk to a lot of different forestry professionals and go to forest plantations and go to mills and then see how all of these systems connected. Hearing from indigenous communities, some of the best days were when we spent the days with local Mapuche people and hearing about their stories and their interactions with the government and how like native land use helped them, but how they were also struggling. These were really significant conversations and they were very important, and just taking the time to listen was every day that we spoke to them was a good day. And then lastly, the biggest thing was learning about, and this was the most shocking thing, was learning about how much privately owned land there was in Chile, which is really different, but almost every site that we visited that was a forestry plantation was privately owned. And there was a lot of multiple land uses, such as like forestry plantations, and then another part of the land would be for agriculture. And it was really insane seeing how much land is private and the different uses and how it can be used for a lot of good. Okay, I will now pass it on to the next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan. I'm a fourth year con student as well, finishing up my last year. And I'm so glad that I went on this field school. I didn't need any credits for this, so I was kind of tempted not to take the course at first because it was expensive and it wasn't going to go towards my degree. And I am so glad that I did it. It was crucial. Oh, never mind. I have a slide that says crucial in my program. It was crucial in my program. I'll start off with it was crucial to my program. Sorry, the slides look a little different. What am I talking about here? Okay, sweet. I'll start off with my main takeaways and how it related to my program. So I'm studying conservation, really interesting program, which is kind of this weird crux of like sociology and policy, but also ecology and land use. And you're focusing on a lot of different things all the time. And because UBC is such a large school, we're bound to the classroom all the time for that. So we have really interesting conversations about things like paper parks, which is this idea of like a park that is large and exists over the land and is supposedly helping conservation and is maybe adding to our goals of like 30 by 30 for protected areas, but actually in practice has no management, has no regulation, and isn't really doing anything. And we've talked about that in class and learned about case studies of that. And also talked about fortress conservation, this idea of like, are parks even the way to protect our nature when it's excluding people from those spaces and can have lots of negative impacts. But I never actually got to experience those firsthand until, is this the right button? Yeah, cool, until Ecuador. Oh, I've got my examples up there. Sorry, we went through this once. Yeah, so you already heard a bit about the program, which is convenient for me, but we went to Tipitini, which is this amazing biodiversity station just on the northern corner of Yasuni National Park, a massive national park in Ecuador. And so we didn't go directly into the park, but we got to see the biodiversity there, which was just totally insane for me to witness. That was one of the biggest impacts for me on the trip. And after spending a week there, really getting to know it, doing research in there, we went back to USFQ, the university in Quito, and got a really cool talk from the director of the program there. And we spent like 3 hours just having our minds blown by how complex that space is. There's a large portion below the park, which is kind of part of the bioreserve, which is for the Waorani people who are an indigenous community there. But there's also the Quechua people, which is another indigenous group that has totally different thoughts and beliefs about how the land should be managed. And there's also oil sanctions, which cover the entire park. So it's a park with protections, but all of it might become oil very, very soon. There's also mining happening, both legally and illegally. Both are very destructive. And mining happening in the park, even though it's a park, because there's national security. So it's just like learning how much you need to dig into things. Don't just trust it firsthand. If you see that something's protected, that's not the end of the story. And then with fortress conservation, we went to this community called Agua Blanca on the coast, which had the misfortune of being located where the government wanted to put a national park about 30 years ago, I think. And they were forced with an ultimatum. Either they could leave this place that they've been living for a long, long time, or they could give up all ownership of their property, never be able to sell it. If they left, they left, and not be able to work their land anymore. They could do it just for sustenance and basically shift their entire economy over to ecotourism. And they did it remarkably well. And we got to see all of the ways that they'd adapted and they were thriving, but it still like hits you, you know, seeing them with like no other choice. They were just forced to do that. And so we talk like theoretically about the impacts, and it almost feels like this like externality, but one that can be accepted, you know, oh, we're going to bring so much ecological benefit. It's okay if this small community has to be displaced, but then you actually meet the community. And I think if I'm going into conservation work in the future, I'm really glad that I had that experience, you know. I think that's all I have to say about this slide. This one's about my most significant moment, which was really, really hard to choose. I don't think I chose the most significant one, but one that really hit home was in Tiputini. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, and I'm really passionate about plants. I like grew up climbing trees and getting really, really into ecology from that angle, because for me to get passionate about something, I need to be able to interact with it. I think that goes for a lot of people. And here, a lot of the wildlife is pretty elusive. Like we've got cool stuff around, but you never see it. Maybe you see a track here or there. So it was always hard for me to get excited about it. And I took like a wildlife course through my program and tried to get engaged, but it was never really hitting home the way that the flora here does. And then I went to the Amazon, and oh my goodness, I've come back like a completely different person. I've got the Merlin app now. I'm looking for birds everywhere, and I've found this like huge new passion that I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life, because the biodiversity there is just absurd. They did some sort of projection, I think, where in a single tree, it's estimated that there's 100,000 different insects in an individual tree. There's like 500 different tree species just in the Ecuadorian Amazon. That's a third of the tree species in all of the Amazon. So it's like, I mean, you go out into the forest here, and if you don't know a lot of the plants, it seems like there's hundreds, and there are hundreds, but you go there and it's just wild. Like I think I always have this issue when I'm talking to people and I'm talking about the need for biodiversity, where it's hard to explain why exactly we need biodiversity. Like I can draw on my arguments, resiliency, sure, intrinsic value, sure. But there I like really hit in, you know, it really sunk in like how crucial it is to protect all the species that we have that have been evolving for forever, you know. So my most significant moment was our final night in Tiputini. Tiputini was like this like crazy week for me of just like growing so much passion that I never have. I also got into photography for the first time. I had a friend there with a camera. She let me use it. So these are all my photos. You can see this snail, like that's my finger. That snail is like larger than my hand. And 20 minutes after I saw that snail, I saw a snail that was smaller than like the eraser of a pencil. It's just totally wild. We saw like cordyceps, which were kind of crazy after watching The Last of Us. That was freaky. On a night walk prior to the one that Ren was speaking about, we got halfway down the trail, and then our guide surprised us. He was like, turn off your lights, and we just kind of stood there. And I was thinking we were trying to listen and hear stuff. But 2 minutes into our lights being off, the entire ground started glowing because there were bioluminescent fungi on the ground. I'd seen that in the ocean, like bioluminescent algae, but like scooping up soil into your hands and looking in your palm and like seeing that glow is just remarkable. And then going back to keto and learning how all of that like might not exist in like a few decades, like is like in so much peril. But my most significant moment was that night walk was so awesome that we like begged to do a second one, which was not part of the schedule, but we got to do on our final night. And even after that was finished, I still was not done. Everyone else went back to the cabins, but there's some trails that have like lights on them that was like okay, I can probably be here alone. I think that's safe. I didn't really get permission, but I stayed there for like another 3 hours till like late at night with my camera, just like soaking it all in and really like taking it in that this was a place that I might not ever be able to go back to, which is like pretty new for me. Usually I go to places and I'm like thinking about bringing new people there to show it later, and like that helps me say goodbye. But it was such a remarkable opportunity to get to go to Puccini. Like all the other places on the trip were incredible, but going so deep into the Amazon, this was like a place that took 2 days to reach. You know, it was like 2 buses and 2 boats, something like that. 3 buses, I don't know. If you have the opportunity to do the school for any students here, like definitely do it. You have to go with an institution to go to a place like that, and it was mind-blowing. Yeah, taking that all in and realizing how my relationship with nature, because wildlife is a huge aspect of nature, had changed over that week was really significant. Okay, last slide. What's it about? My key takeaways. Okay. Key takeaways: the urgency of conservation of the equatorial tropics. I'm always focused on Canada because that's what we focus on in our courses, which makes sense. We're in Canada. And there's a lot to do here, like really soon, especially in like the lower mainland and like in the Delta region, there's a lot of loss that's imminent. But the tropics are like this really unique place that are facing a huge host of threats and also might have a lot of solutions for problems we don't even have yet. And I think that they're so overwhelmed right now with how much there is to do that it would be really helpful if folks up in Canada started paying a little bit more attention to what's happening globally and especially what's happening in the equatorial regions, because we went to like that talk at USFQ afterwards, and he was like, he's reaching out to people in the US, to us, to other people in Canada, like just trying to find allies, because there's so much work to do, so much potential for research, for management. There's just not enough people, not enough funding right now. So that was really driven home for me. Okay, I give example here in Yangia. I was in awe of the power of a community to organize, and you already heard about Yangia a little bit more about their story. In like the 1980s, they were a community that was pretty much subsistence living. They were doing some farming. They were doing a lot of logging. They're in the cloud forest. That was primarily how they were supporting themselves. And they had this transition, sort of like Agua Blanca did, towards ecotourism, but completely on their own accord. They decided that that was the better way forward, that they could actually be healthier and happier and make more money on an ecotourism thing, which was pretty like new at that time. Now it's becoming a lot more common, but they really paved the way, at least in that area. And there's other communities following suit now, which is pretty cool. But hearing about like all the roadblocks that they'd hit, how they had eventually organized, and all of like the little tricks, like creating a corporation, which their community was under for different administrative reasons, and balancing ecotourism with also creating products. Like they started making cheeses and jams and all these different things, has allowed them, after 40 years of this transition, to be like the happiest community I've ever been in my life. It was pretty remarkable. Like actually getting to stay in the home space and like play with the kids. I don't think I'd ever been in a place where every single person was as proud as they were in that community. I mean, they were all sending their kids to private schools, and they were actually like reforesting and replanting, and they were just so proud of not only themselves but also the land that they were in and were now stewarding. So that was amazing. But I think that sort of thing of like the power of a community was a thread the entire time. Like also with the turtles, there's like this little NGO, I think a nonprofit, I don't really know the difference, called Equilibria Azul. And they're this small, tirelessly working community doing turtle conservation pretty much all on their own out there. And so there were like 3 steps to the day. You heard a little bit about this. First, we went to this beach, and this beach is a really special beach because it's one of only 2 beaches where the hawksbill sea turtle is nests in like the entire world. So this is a very endangered sea turtle that actually a fisherman called someone at Equilibria Azul and like told them when they found one, because before, I think a few decades ago, they were thought to be extinct. So they were recently refound. They only breed at 2 beaches, and we got to go to one of those beaches where they're like finding their nests and taking the eggs out of the nest, because the chances of them actually surviving and making it to the water on their own is like pretty much 0. So they find the nest by like sticking a pole in the sand, and where it sinks, then there's a nest there. And then they carefully excavate and collect the eggs, and they bring them back to the hatchery and they raise them and then release them. And that was like a powerful moment, was sitting by there. I was like on the data sheet recording, oh, that one's dead, that one's dead, that one's dead. And like dying from overheat, dying from invasive roots, dying from fungi, bacteria, but some of them survive and they're like working around the clock nonstop, this small group of people to try to keep the species afloat and all the other species that go through that area. But that's just, yeah, another example of like how powerful a small group of people can be. And there's people like all over the world doing the stuff that you don't hear about. So that's inspiring to me. I want to find more of those groups and try to be a part of them. And then lastly, yeah, I've already spoken to this. From a distance, conservation issues often seen as though they have a clear solution, but it's always much more complicated. I think it's like easy in small groups of people to critique whatever problem and say, oh, it's just the people who are power hungry or are greedy or whatever. And if only they just stopped doing that and put their money into this, it'd be fixed. Like, I feel like that's a simple and convenient take. That's just never the case. There's always so many different parties who are all needing different things coming from different angles. And it's like that framework was convenient and it helps to point the finger at whoever, maybe it's the one in power, and like probably they could be doing more. But I think the real way to start approaching these issues is by figuring out who's involved, what's their stake, what's their background, what's actually the web of complexity here, and then start breaking it down because it's totally insane. But there are people starting to make progress. Yeah, that was scrambled, but that's my bit. I'll give it over to Vanessa.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Vanessa. I'm in my third year in the Global Resource Systems program within the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. And for those of you who aren't familiar with GRS, the general structure of it is you choose a region and a resource to focus your studies on. So I'm focusing on environmental sustainability in Latin America. And I'm also doing a minor in Spanish. And a degree requirement of GRS is an international experience. And so this Forestry 456 Chile Field School was absolutely perfect for me. And I'm so excited to share with you what I learned while on the trip. All right, so starting off, if I had to boil the entire field school down to one significant moment, it would have to be seeing the araucarias, or as I'd previously known them as monkey puzzle trees, for the first time in their only native habitat in the entire world. Monkey puzzle trees were my favorite trees here in Canada, and that was just seeing the ornamental ones that we have here in Vancouver, but having the opportunity to travel there, and this was in our first week in Chile, so things hadn't really sunk in yet that I was on this incredible experience. And seeing the endemic species here, it was absolutely jaw-dropping. And within this experience, being able to learn firsthand about their physiological adaptations, their historical value for Chile's native forest conservation, and their cultural value within the Mapuche community in Chile. One thing that I learned on this day that I will never forget, just because I think it's so powerful, is that it is Mapuche belief that because araucarias grow on the tallest mountains in the Andes, they are the connection between the universe and the earth, and they absorb the energy from the universe and then dissipate it into earth below. And I just think that is so powerful and so amazing. And yeah, to wrap this day up, it was such a surreal moment, and everything clicked for me in this moment that I was on the other end of the world in one of the most beautiful countries I've ever seen. You can see the volcano that was right there. It was so incredible. And I was with like-minded people studying everything that I'm passionate about. Perfect. And then, there we go. So like Jay said, it was a course and we learned so many interesting things. And if I had to boil it down to 3 overall things that I learned. The first one was how important the role of eco-philanthropy was in Chile's native forest conservation. This was a concept that I was not familiar with previously. And as Jaya touched on, it's because so much of the land that contains native forests in Chile is privately owned. A lot of the sites that we visited were examples of private landowners investing their time, money, and resources into transforming their land for conservation purposes. And so that was absolutely morally incredible. One example that I loved was we visited a place called On Call Park in Valdivia, where they protected an insane amount of tree, shrub, and plant species, animal species, and they had non-timber forest products that they harvested to diversify the income of the surrounding community, which was incredible. And then the importance of an open-minded, in-depth, interdisciplinary approach to solving local, regional, and global problems. The entire 5 weeks that we were there, we were visiting different sites every day, large and small scale plantations, mills, national parks, reserves, nurseries. I could go on forever, but all of it was absolutely necessary. The title of the course, like Andrea said in the beginning, it was the role of natural and planted forests in the global bioeconomy. And visiting all of these places was absolutely necessary to gather every individual and community's perspective on the issue. And yeah, that was super important. And then the third most important learning experience was surrounding precision silviculture and how optimal soils, climate, genetics, and management come together to create and maintain Chile's exotic, fast-growing plantations. This was absolutely incredible. We got the opportunity with some of Chile's biggest forestry companies, Arauco and CMPC, to learn about how their past research and their current methods for product yield and growth have all come together to create these absolutely insane results, as you can see here. This was at CMPC's seed orchard. It was a 2nd generation breeding improvement program. And you can see at the top there, with Dylan and Liam for reference, those trees are just 11 months old and they were 2 meters tall, which is absolutely insane. And also you can see through the progression of the ages of the trees that not only is their height incredible, but they're structurally perfect. Like, yeah, so that was an insane learning experience for me. And another learning experience was this day. This was a bonding experience for sure. We were going to see the oldest tree in the world, called the El Gran Abuelo, or El Alerce Millonario, and it was absolutely incredible. But we did have to overcome some exhaustion and some absolutely insane weather conditions to get there. So this was a learning moment too, because even though heading into the trees were torrential rain, insane winds, everyone was tired. Once we got into the trail and we were surrounded by the native forests and we got to see the oldest tree in the world, it was 1000% worth it. And it was one of my favorite days by far. Perfect. And then to wrap up my section of the presentation, Forestry 456, it was so much more than just a course abroad for me. Obviously, on paper going into it, as I started my presentation with, it was perfect for my degree and my specializations. But through every single activity we did, every single day, it solidified what I want my future career to be like. And on that note, through all the companies and communities that we visited, I had the opportunity to network with the people down there and establish some possible career connections. And in the future, I would love to come back and return and work in Chile. It's definitely a big goal of mine. As I mentioned, I'm doing a minor in Spanish. And so going into the field school, I would consider myself semi-fluent in Spanish, but through the UBC coursework, it was very reading and writing heavy. So those were my strengths. But after this field school, where especially in the southern, more rural areas of Chile, not very many people spoke English. So I got to speak and practice my Spanish every day with our hosts, with Andres, with our friend Julie on the trip, who was fluent. And so my Spanish has never been better than after this field school. And then lastly, it was such an incredible trip. I got to connect with people who are passionate about the same things as me, and I made lifelong friends. So I cannot recommend this field school enough to anybody who is interested about any of the things that we're here talking about today. It has changed my life in the best way. So yeah, and I'll pass it over to Faith, who's our last speaker today.
Hi everyone, my name is Faith. I'm a 4th-year student in the Human Geography program. I'm an international student from Singapore, and going to Ecuador was definitely a dream come true for me. Before this trip, I had heard a lot about the Amazon rainforest, but it always just existed as this magical place in my mind that I probably would never have the chance to visit. So when I did, it was definitely an amazing experience for me. So without further ado, I'll go into sharing some of my most significant moments with you. So the first thing that was really significant for me was visiting the community of Yungia. So as my friends Ren and Ethan shared with you earlier, Yungia is a community in the cloud forest. And what I found really inspiring and memorable about this time in Yungia is how enterprising, innovative, and sustainable they are as a community. So in the past, there used to be quite a bit of deforestation in this area, but in recent years, they've really shifted to ecotourism, reforestation, and other ways of sustaining themselves through generating income, making jams, producing their own cheese. It's really amazing to see how they've gathered together. And I think as a geography student, and even in my courses in conservation and forestry, we hear a lot about communities and their power to evoke change, but then we also hear about these structures and institutions that make it really difficult for real change to happen. But to see in real life a community like Yungia really being so inspiring and so enterprising and so innovative was definitely something that encouraged me a lot and challenged me to think about the power of community. And one thing that I really enjoyed, well, I have to say I enjoyed it, but it was also really difficult, was planting trees in the community of Yungia. So as my friend Ren mentioned earlier, we transported 250 trees from the top of a fairly steep slope to the bottom. And then we would go up and down a couple times to bring all the trees down. And yeah, Ethan definitely did the most work. I was busy taking a lot of water breaks because I realized how unfit I was. But I have to say that it was such a cool experience to be able to be a part of their reforestation efforts and also to see the hard work that actually goes into it. And this is really what they do on a very constant basis. And being able to see the effort and the heart that goes into it was a huge part of my learning experience for me. So I would say that being in Yungia, not just the beautiful views from the cloud forest, but just seeing the community spirit, the way that they're passionate about becoming more sustainable, passionate about building a better life for themselves, but also being a model of sustainable change was definitely so inspiring and so encouraging for me. And next, I'll be talking about my learning experiences. So as I mentioned, going to the Amazon rainforest was always a dream for me. And what more amazing than to do research in the Amazon rainforest? I would definitely say that this is one of the most challenging but memorable learning experiences that I've ever gone through. And we had to do fieldwork in pretty challenging conditions. So for about 7 days, we were in different types of forest in the Amazon rainforest, collecting data about the tree species, the tree height, as well as the biodiversity that was in the area. And I would say that one of the most difficult things for me was not knowing what to expect every day. Because something about learning in university, you know what to expect when you go to class. You know that today the lecturer is going to talk about this. So you do your readings beforehand, you're prepared. But when you go into the field, you really don't know what the weather will be like. You don't know what you're going to find, and you don't know what kind of dangers you will meet. But it was definitely really cool for us to do that together as a team, to work together and to help one another. And I think that it definitely sharpened my skills in the area of research and in the area of fieldwork. Because prior to this, in my program, I had learned quite a bit about what fieldwork is supposed to be like. But doing it actually solidifies that knowledge for you. You realize it's not easy to use a rangefinder when the canopy is so thick. And you realize sometimes you're trying to measure out a plot, but there are so many trees that the measuring tape just doesn't go in a straight line. And you're like, what do I do now? So I definitely thought that it was such a cool learning experience for me, although I was really challenged beyond my comfort zone. One thing that I really enjoyed was having our guides with us. We had guides to lead us through the forest, and they were so knowledgeable, and the information that we shared with us really helped us to understand the complexity and just the diversity of the forest. They also taught us a lot about the different ecosystem services. So one memorable thing that happened for me was that I got stung by wasps because I wasn't very observant. I just walked through the forest, and then all of a sudden I bumped into a wasp's nest. So that was pretty rough. But the cool thing was that our guide showed us a liana that actually has medicinal properties. So when you use it on your wasp sting, it really has a healing balm effect. And you know, you always hear in, like, at least for me, I've always heard in my classes about all these medicinal properties about the forest. And I always thought, oh, that's pretty cool. But then when it actually happens to you, like you get stung by wasps and then something comes about and gives you such a healing touch, it's like, wow, the forest is really cool. And we really need to conserve this. So those were some of my most significant experiences and learning moments in the Amazon rainforest. And finally, I'd like to share how this has contributed to my program and my growth as a student and a future professional in the industry. So like I said, I really gained important fieldwork skills and experience. And I think in the future, I'd be excited to apply this to my work. And secondly, I was really inspired by the biodiversity and landscapes. So like Ren mentioned earlier, we went through 4 different ecosystems, and it was so cool to see how the biodiversity differs across different landscapes. And it definitely piqued my interest to want to learn more. And third, and I think this was one of definitely the most interesting aspects of the trip, was learning about the social, political, and environmental challenges that are involved in conservation. So before this, I always knew like this is like the golden keywords that you need to write in an essay about forestry. There are social, political, international challenges. But then when I was actually on the field and we were listening to experts talk about the challenges of conserving the Yasuni National Park, the challenges of, dealing with oil companies, and then also protecting indigenous people's interests, and then also the government has different pressures on them, it really puts everything into perspective for you, and you realize that conservation is really a complex field, and you can't just be skilled in the area of data collection, for instance, and you also can't just know about the political challenges. You need to be able to think across disciplines and really have an interdisciplinary approach to dealing with issues in conservation. And for me, that really challenged me intellectually to think about what is really at stake here and how do we go about resolving these challenges while taking into consideration different stakeholder perspectives and interests. And last but not least, I would definitely say it was so humbling to learn from local communities, conservationists, and guides who have just been there for years doing the hard work, and being able to hear from them about the challenges that they face in their field and how they persevere through that really encourages me, because I think sometimes as students, we learn about all these big things that are happening. We learn about the climate crisis, we learn about deforestation, and it all gets a bit discouraging sometimes. You're like, well, I don't think there's anything much we can do about that, or it's quite the gone case. But when you see all of these professionals working so hard and the challenges that they've overcome and the ways that they continue to inspire change in their communities, the ways that they continue to work hard to protect biodiversity, it really encourages you to think about how you can also contribute to the field and how you can also play a part in creating a more sustainable future. So all in all, I would say this was definitely one of the most impactful learning experiences for me throughout my 4 years at UBC. I'm so thankful I had the chance to go on this trip. And I also really enjoyed being able to learn alongside my classmates who are so passionate in the field as well. So with that, we have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be happy to take questions.
That was amazing. I got excited all together again, so I want to go again to run this field school. So are there any questions for our students about their experiences, about anything?
Good question. So you probably talked about that, but how long were those different trips?
Oh, so we were down in South America for a month for the trip, and then the whole course load was 2 months. So we came back to Canada and we were doing a lot of work when we got back.
We were in the Amazon for a week, then we were in Quito for a little bit, then we were on the coast for I think 4 days, something like that. And then we were in Quito for a little bit, and then we were in Yungia and the cloud forest, both in Yungia and also in Mindo, the cloud forest area, also for about a week, and then the Paramo for 4 days or so. So it was about a week for each bioregion. Yeah.
And really quickly, the Chile Field School was pretty similar. We were down there for a little bit longer. We were in Chile for 5 weeks. And then our course load just continued for a month after the course.
I think we have questions from the Zoom audience. Carolyn.
Yeah, Andres, I have a question for you. I'm really amazed at the wealth of experiences that these students were able to access through the field school. And wow, what an amazing sounding course. I loved all of your presentations and, the passion that you brought to it. I'm just curious, how do you arrange that complexity, Andreas, of different experiences for a class?
Thanks so much for the question, and thanks for your comments. I think it takes a bit of time to get things organized in a field school like this. The partners in Chile, in this case, were extremely helpful, and I had someone there hired to deal with the details of the logistics. Erica, if you're here listening, thank you so much, Erica. And so it is a back and forth. It is something that we need to do with months in advance. Logistics are somewhat complicated, but it went well at the end. I think it all comes together with a bit of coordination and with someone helping with making those connections. It was really good for me to have had those connections. Many of the partners that we had there, I knew from many years ago when I was an undergrad there. And with a small group of students, it made it a bit easier as well. So it was eight people. We rented 2 cars. We drove by ourselves. It was relatively easy in that sense. I'm not sure if I fully answered that, but
That explains it all. Thank you.
yeah, thanks. If there's anything else here. Very good. Any other questions?
I was, excuse me, I was wondering if you had any assignments to do like during the field school itself. Could you speak a bit more about that?
So for the Ecuador Field School, we did have a few assignments. We had an in-person presentation on one of our essays. We had 2 different essays, a conservation essay and a forest resources essay. We presented on one of them, and then what else did we do?
And when we were back, that's when we wrote a report that we like a pretty robust outline while we were still in Quito, which took a whole day. Yeah, it felt like a lot. Every essay also had like an annotated bibliography ahead of it, so there was lots of time on the computer for sure.
I was gonna say, this experience definitely made me learn how to do a cited bibliography really quickly in about 30 minutes.
Okay, so for the Chile field school, during the field school itself, there wasn't that much work. We did have a field book that we had to bring with us to each site, and we would have to take notes and write down data about the trees and what we were seeing on site. And then most of the work, actually all of the work, was once we were back from the trip, and we had to do a field report, like a trip report about our experiences and connecting the learning outcomes. We had to do an essay. So there were a few topics and each of us were assigned for like a literature review. And then there was also a final exam. Yeah.
I believe there's also a difference in the credits too, though. So I think Ecuador was a larger workload, but it was they're both 6 credit? Oh.
I was also going to say one of our final assignments we got to do is a creative project. So we got to take more of our personal experiences and have like a more creative side to it, which was very nice to kind of recap the whole course.
I want to add that in Chile, I could hardly imagine how we would do a lot of office work because the days are long. We wake up really early, we get back and it's dark. So we thought of just concentrating everything after. But that may change a bit in the next field course. Any other question?
So all of you talked about like the great things in both field schools. So what did you find as the most challenging for both field schools?
I would say for myself, I can be a bit more of like a shy and introverted person. So I think it was a bit challenging to be with 20 people constantly all the time, and getting a break away from that was a little bit difficult some days, but I made it through and I found support with some of my closest friends. And I think I made definitely way more friends on this trip, and it was really amazing.
I would say one challenging thing for me, because I come from a human geography background, is definitely the scientific writing for me. It was definitely out of my comfort zone, something that I had to pick up quickly. So that was one challenge. I think the other challenge, as I mentioned earlier, are the somewhat difficult conditions. So I would definitely say it is physically strenuous. Maybe I'm a bit, I don't think Ethan would say the same thing. Yeah, some parts of it are physically strenuous. So I think that was definitely challenging as well. But I would say for the amount of fun and the amount of learning that you have, when I recall the trip now, it doesn't feel quite as painful as it was when I was climbing up and down the hill. So yeah.
The only really challenging thing that comes to mind is kind of the same point that you mentioned earlier, is just because you're spending 5 weeks with the same people, and I love all of you guys so much, but sometimes you need some alone time. So some walks were taken and they were great, but that was the only big challenge for me.
For me, it was the time and how busy it was. It was a lot of like early mornings, like waking up at like 4 to 6, and then coming back at like 8 or 9, and then just being in the car for like 6 hours, and then walking for another like 5 hours. It was just like go, go, go. And it was really, really fun, but it was also very tiring and like no rest.
Yeah, I think along that same vein, I want to give so much props to Fernanda and also Susie, who's not here today, for organizing Ecuador, because it was so absurd. We were, I think, a larger group. It was like 20 of us, so we needed to get a whole bus. And I was just counting in my head like how many different places we slept in 1 month, and I think it was probably 13 or 14, which is a lot. It was like a lot of movement, which it was like so cool, but it was totally a blur. And like when people ask me how Ecuador was and I have to think about it, it's just like intimidating to even go back, because it was like get there, go on a bus, sleep a night, go to the Amazon, come back, sleep, go to the coast, and then move to another place on the coast, and then go back to Quito, and then go back to the cloud forest, and then move again. It was like that was the most challenging part, was how much movement there was and change, but it's also like change between incredible things. And it definitely teaches you how to have that resilience and how to like find your downtime on the bus to like recover. I think the 10-hour bus drives were very important for everybody's mental health. Yeah. Yeah.
We still have time for a couple more, or maybe one more. Questions? Is there something on Zoom? So we had some of our partners. I sent the invitations, so some of them have joined via Zoom. So thank you so much. I see On Call Pilolcura. Fantastic. And Fernanda, thank you so much for having us. Any final question?
So according to presentation, the Chile Field School is like less in the wilderness than the Ecuador one. Like less in the nature and more in the companies and labs.
So in the Chile Field School, we go to a lot of forests and a lot of national parks. And yeah, I don't know exactly how many days there are in nature in Ecuador versus Chile, but we see a lot of things. I think one of the things in Chile is the diversity of things we see. So one day you're in a local community, and another day in a massive plantation with machines harvesting logs and so on. So it's really diverse. I don't know if you want to say something else about that. But yeah, a lot of nature, a lot of beautiful forests. The Chilean forests are very spectacular, very spectacular. They're temperate rainforests, but they're different than the temperate rainforests here, which are also spectacular. Not comparing that, but they're quite impressive. 1:30, I think that should be it. So thank you so much. It was really nice to share with you. And thanks.